Hi everyone. I hope you had a chance to grab something to eat and drink. Welcome to today's last panel. I'm also trying to keep awake, just eat more kueh, essentially. My name is Joanne Leow. I'm associate editor with AcademiaSG, the newest member. I'm the only humanist on the thing, so no more social science today. So this is a panel on decentering knowledge production, and I'm actually really delighted to moderate this panel this afternoon because it's a panel of arts practitioners and friends whose work I followed over the years. And I've constantly learned so much from them and drawn a great amount of inspiration because I'm a literary and cultural studies scholar. So I'm really very, very excited. We're gonna have the speakers in the order of the program. And I will just give brief introductions. As Cherian says, if you want longer bios, they're all there in the program as well. So first up, we have Ela. Ela is a visual and performance artist, and her intimate works incorporate objects, moving images, and live performance to generate discussion about gender, history, and identity. And if you want to see more about the exhibitions that her work has been shown, I really invite you to check out the program. Her stuff is great. So,
Hello, hi. I'm Ela. Sorry, I'm not really good with public speaking, so I wrote a script. So I just want to start by saying how deeply grateful I am to be part of this meaningful gathering with activists, organizers, thinkers that I have looked up to for the longest time, and so glad to be having a small part in this. So just a bit of background. When Joanne approached me to talk about decentering knowledge, I was truly stumped because I don't really consider it ever. So it was a great exercise to think about what decentering knowledge means. So I think when we were on our walk last week in the Scorching Heat, I think it's best for me to start on what it means first to be producing knowledge and to define what that means. So just a little bit about myself. I'm actually mostly from a self-taught background. I dropped out of art school and then took a part-time degree in soci. So I would consider myself an unruly, undisciplined learner. What I mean by this is that I have the freedom to seek knowledge in whatever ways I want and cultivate my own modes of learning and eventually sharing. This has somehow shaped my practice, and especially in my sharing with others. For me, knowledge production or reproduction begins with simple act of gathering. That's why today is called There is Magic in the Gathering. Today, we are going to look at the act of gathering as a mode of decentering knowledge. So just a little bit about my so-called, what I would say, motivation in my practice or openings. So I conventionally fall under the category of interdisciplinary artist. So I dabble with sound, writing, photography, video, and performance. But as mentioned before, I am undisciplined and don't possess a mastery in any of these specific modes of expression. Instead, I am more comfortable thinking of myself as a storyteller. So when I wrote this, and then I came here just now and I heard storytelling being said a lot during the previous panel, I was like, yeah, we're all thinking of the same thing. So my motivation is actually rather simple. Growing up in Singapore and now growing old in Singapore, I find a lot of absences in the stories that we tell. When I say stories here, I mean state narratives, history that support the building of the nation, stories that keeps the status quo in check. I, however, have no interest in these kinds of stories and instead find myself seeking for more stories that fall in the cracks or hide between the gaps. In cultivating and shaping these stories, I am interested mostly in speculation, which is creating openings into gender, history, cultures, and politics. Kind of knowing and sensing, which is to revive things that have been lost in our bodies, in our cultures, in when we share with each other, and also most importantly, kinship, modes of tenderness, connections, affinities, and the act of grieving together. So basically my story is the practice of remembering and reconnecting the things that have been taken away, prohibited, erased, and forgotten. Okay. So these are some of the works. I'm not going into much of them, just because of time. But I just want to use this quote, "Storing otherwise," as a kind of something that I hold very important to me. So this is taken from Donna Haraway when she described this notion of storing otherwise, and the quote that she shared was, the deepening of the destruction of the ways of living and dying on this earth is happening, and the story of this earth, the arts of living on a damaged planet, the absolute obligation to become capable, to render each other capable of changing the story of ongoingness, cultivating in earth, in the tunnels of the earth, to be at risk of each other and to propose something real, to make a proposition that which is not yet but might be, you know. Until the stories are told like that, how to make the weak story stronger and strong stories weaker. So when I share this work, I would want to reiterate that it's not simply just the finished work in which the storing takes place. In fact, it is during the making of the work that it is the most apparent. Before we begin to okay, next one. So just a bit about how this is all started. I feel like at some point, being an artist, there's a point where I feel like I got activated to think more deeply into how to make things for people, not just for myself. So this happened in 2019. I don't want to reiterate too much about it, but what happened is that a group of young artists, including myself, got together to kind of ask the question why a sex offender was allowed in an exhibition because his name was misspelled. And so what happened was things got really ugly because we young activist artists, spirited beings, didn't know how to go about doing what, like activating in a safe way. So after that, I feel like several of us involved got a really bad rap for like a few years, and in fact, even though it ended pretty badly and the repercussions of our confrontation were still felt after, I learned a lot from the experience, but somehow fortunately found that my practice have shifted to consider and reconsider the magic in the gathering. So after this, I felt like I was consciously thinking about how to gather more when I'm making work, how to gather people and stuff like that. So this continued on in my practice, and I gather at every chance I get. So just a bit of sharing. So the so-called confrontation involving the sex offender became a work in itself, where there were many variations that happened after that, and the one on the top right is actually something that we did together. It's got together, we go over what is not over, and this was done in Substation as a residency. So there we talk about things like what does it mean to be accountable, what does it mean for someone to do harm to you. So all these are like questions, and I think like when we gather, the one thing that I always tell myself is that we're gathered to figure out what we do not know. And that for me is the kind of knowledge that we're trying to produce and reproduce with each other. What is it that we do not know, and how do we go about knowing more of what we do not know? And the second one is actually like a eating together kind of activation that we did, where we got people to come together at this space at Changi, and it was under this organizers called A Weekend Affair. And what happened is that it was very beautiful, like so it's just me and my collaborator, but then we asked for volunteers to come, and then because of time we didn't really get the volunteers like specific roles, or you do this, you do this, you do this. Instead, everybody was just free to help, and because there was no hierarchy in who is in charge of what, the fluidity of it allowed for people to just come in, share something, share this is how you like use a spoon to skin, like to peel off ginger because we didn't have enough utensil, or this is how you clean fish, and suddenly it became like this very fluid sharing, and then at the end of it we ate together. And then at the bottom is like so during my studio residency, and I still do it now, I always like to gather friends and kind of rest and do nothing. Especially as artists, we always think that when we get together it's usually for work or collaboration, but sometimes it's just fun to play. So I have that a lot in the things that I do. And the last one is this work called Pasang, which is part of the Singapore Biennale, where we got together at 6 a.m. in the morning to walk from one side of Pandan River to the end. And although it's only 6 of us, I think the activation was really strong because we were just in the space, the physical space, honoring like rivers that has been turned into canals, and then just walking past it. Yeah, so let me go back to my script, sorry. So subsequently in the years that followed, I made a point to include an opportunity together. Yeah, so these gatherings are loose in structures with no outputs. So no outputs at all, just get together and do things together. I also consider the risks such as privilege of time, safety and capacity together in this manner. I mean, it's only fair to be aware that in a gathering of physical bodies, who has the most to gain and who has the most to lose, especially since protests are criminalized in Singapore, most protests are. So I started to think of other ways in which some resonance can be felt in alternative modes of gathering. So this includes polls such as this one, which I use a Google form, and open calls on social media platforms such as Instagram that ask prompt-based stuff so that it's sort of like collect where everybody is. So it's a kind of gathering in itself. So this is one example of a work I did where I want to look at like urbanization and the impact on how many buildings have been removed. And so I did an open call for people to contribute, and then through that I asked a series of questions which you can see. And what's beautiful about this is that people gave similar answers like Sungai Road, they gave like Jurong Entertainment Centre, and they don't know each other but they describe the kind of loss that they feel. So from there, I actually made a work which I'm going to play really quickly. So this particular one is responding to Jurong Entertainment Centre and Sungai Road. So this is what the work looks like. This is another work. It's called Red Thread, where a friend, my collaborator Sonia Kwek, and also a dear friend, and I decided to kind of look at naked bodies and how like you can't even be naked in your own house. So we did a series of work where we got people to first we did it on our own, where we brought our naked bodies out at certain places in Singapore, and we called it Red Thread. And then subsequently the work grew and we got people to send in their naked photos, and we also made a booth outside a substation where people can go in and take a naked photo of themselves, then we print it out. And on each naked body, naked part, there's a very intimate story that's shared why this part of their body is special to them. And this project is still growing, and for me, what I learned, I mean most important is what I learned from each project that I feel is most precious, is that I learned a new relationship with my body from all this sharing. So I found that very beautiful. I'm going to skip this. So just a bit more. So on another tangent is a different kind of gathering, which is what I mentioned before, which is collecting, specifically also from archives such as newspapers, oral history interviews, and even conversations with grab uncles. Every stories that I encounter dismantle further my perceptions of living in this city, softens it, make it more bearable. I learned too that a story is often reciprocated with another story, expanding into different worlds that are similar but not the same. In the gathering, I learned that there is no wrong story, just a different stories. And in these stories, knowledge is produced again and again, reproduced again and again in a fluid rhizomatic web. There is a practice of doing and thinking together, even in most instances where physical togetherness is actually not the case. Approaching the end of my sharing, I can't help but consider my own practices of storytelling in the act of gathering and retelling and telling it together over and over across time and space with others. Not only humans, but rivers and seas, lands and trees, ghosts and spirits. How stories have always moved me most as I seek them with veracity. In old interviews, conversation with strangers, friends and kin. How I find them in the making, in the quiet, in listening deeply, refusing and revolting against a kind of illiteracy that is the consequence of colonized modes of knowledge production. Here in these stories, I feel love gather at its highest amplitude, loudest in its sharing, in its energies manifesting. Dan.
Thank you so much, Sheila. Thank you for sharing your work. I feel like I need to go back and look at all these things. So up next, sorry, I'm gonna have to like adjust my notes. So up next we have Heng Leun, who is a prominent figure in the Singapore art scene. He built his artistic career as a theatre director, playwright, dramaturg, and educator, and of course engaging the community with various issues through the arts. So I'm sure he's no stranger to many of you.
Thank you. I would like to thank AcademiaSG for inviting me here. If I do sound a bit weird, it's because a lot of time when I'm speaking, I'm actually doing translation inside there. I'm more comfortable actually speaking in Mandarin. So allow me that space. I come from a theatre company, so I'm a theatre practitioner. I started this company with my friends about 34 years ago. So we really started as a Mandarin theatre company. And then over the years, our practice has changed quite a fair bit. Currently, most people would recognize us by being a company that does work with community. Secondly, probably our works are what we call as engaged. That means in a way it involves either the community or it involves the audience who are watching the piece. And then lastly, one of the things that we often are being known for is that a lot of our work happens in public space and either site-specific or site response. So what you see on this picture is a piece that we did in Dakota Crescent just before it was being, just before the residents were being asked to move out. So we actually spent some time working with them and documenting their stories. So, I mean, we have always been asking why we do theatre. I mean, some people think that we do social work. So, of course, you know, and personally, because I'm actually trained in mathematics, so I've already gone out of my comfort zone to do theatre. And of course, then I've got to start asking myself, and over the years, you know, why do theatre and not something else? Or what does it mean to be a theatre maker in a community, and what do we stand for as a theatre company? What is the basis of our art practice? And this has been that kind of question that has been coming to us almost every 3 years and every 5 years. For the very reason because there was this theatre practitioner called Jerzy Grotowski, very important theatre master, who actually gave this reminder that, you know, as any creative, every 3 years you need to relook at your work and ask yourself, what is it that you're doing? So that sort of gave me a kind of timeline for the company. Every 5 years, we probably need to relook at what we do. But with these questions, I kept thinking about it, and there was this story that I encountered with one of my audience. So I've been running workshops on theatre of the oppressed. As some of you already know what forum theatre is, which is a form of theatre where there's a short play, and then there will be a problem that needs to be solved, and people will come up and try to replace the protagonist, or what we would call as a rehearsal for change or rehearsal for revolution. And it goes on and on. So there was this audience who was always watching our play. And then one day he decided then to come to attend the workshop on how to make theatre of the oppressed. And I was like, why do you want to do this? And he was actually a driving instructor. And I think you all have had driving instructor, you know that most of them are quite impatient, very unhappy most of the time. And he was telling me that, actually he agrees that he is actually very impatient and he can get angry very easily. And so every time when he and his wife have some altercation, he would start to be very angry and he was shout. So there was one day, because he kept watching our forum theatre, and I think over food and the wife started to get angry, and then he started to get angry. Then he suddenly remembered someone. Very sadly, he remembered me. He remembered me running a forum theatre where there was a moment that I said, stop, let's take a moment, pause, and let's think about what this means. And he suddenly remembered me saying, pause, and think about this. And then he sort of stopped himself. And then he said, that sort of changed the direction of the conversation that day. And then he decided to come for the workshop to see what to say next and what to do next. I think that was instructive for me really because I realized that maybe the kind of work we do, as Eugenio Baba, another theatre practitioner, says, that, it's not the theatre, the content that change people. A lot of the time is how you make theatre and the process of making it that changes people. And in this case, for this particular audience, I think he wanted some change in his life. He wanted to make some possibility for his life. And so in that way, I would nowadays, I'm trying to think about our practice as a practice of change within a space. Because as a theatre practitioner, there are three main elements to work with. Human in a space over a particular time, a duration of time. So, in this case, Augusto Boal, the person who developed or invented forum theatre or theatre of the oppressed, and he just died, he died in 2009, 3rd of May. He talks about the aesthetic space, right? We watch a play, we do see a work, we enter into an aesthetic space. And he defined an aesthetic space as a pentadimensional space. That means there are two things here. I hope it's not art talk. I'm trying to make it at least understandable to myself. So there is a physical space where you're there, but there are two other spaces at work. Memory as well as imagination. So, and this is actually very instructive for me because it sort of remind me that, when you watch a play, actually a lot of time, the play resonates with you because it comes from part of your memories, certain things that you have connected before. And then the imaginative elements within the play allows you to think of more possibilities. And that is the interplay of that aesthetic space. Now, and then it reminds me also of Paul Klee's drawing or painting, Angelus Novus, and some of you who may be familiar. And I want to quote this from Walter Benjamin, who talks about this painting. This painting named Angelus Novus shows an angel looking as though he's about to move away from something he's fixedly contemplating. His eyes are staring, his mouth is open, his wings are spread. This is how one pictures the angel of history. His face is turned towards the past. When we perceive a chain of events, he sees one single catastrophe, which keeps piling wreckage upon wreckage and hurls it in front of its feet. This angel looking back the past that tells you all the wreckage. And then the angel would like to stay, awaken the death, and make whole what has been smashed. But the storm is blowing in front, where it's towards the paradise, from paradise. It has got caught in its wings with such violence that the angel can no longer close them. The storm irresistibly propels him into the future to which his back is turned, while the pile of debris before him grows skyward. The storm is what he calls as progress. So there is progress that is coming so fast. And then there is the memory that you are being trapped in. And I think this is a very beautiful description of actually a lot of time, the people we work with, the oppressed. And if I use the aesthetic space as a way to demonstrate, the kind of work that we do, or we are working on. So we have a three-dimensional space. I'm just trying to use this. So half the time, as a human being, we are entwined by our memories. And if we do have imagination, then we find our imagination being entrapped by that memory over here. And a lot of time, then we're seeing, who has a much more vivid memory to bring us out of this possible kind of memory into other possibility. And in that sense, having imagination means having hope, because you can imagine other possibility. So with this, being the aesthetic space, the three-dimensional space where they are in, but at the same time, when we look at the human being, there's another three-dimensional there. There is the body, our physical one, our cognitive being, our mind, and our spirit, or our emotion at the same time. So if the memory has trapped us, our body, our mind, and our spirit get trapped within there. So my interest then is, as a theatre practitioner, how do we release this body? And the theory simply is this, that if the memory can take over, or can relook at some of the memories and look at memories that can help us to move forward, or to redress some of the memories, some of the history that has gone through with us, allow imagination, allows for us to look for other possibility, maybe the human can be liberated with some memories that I don't want, but some imaginations that I can propel into other possible futures. So that is actually a description of what the kind of work that we do. We actually focus on trying to get this person having been activated by engaging their memories and try to relieve a certain kind of, allow certain imaginative possibility. And to do this, actually, that means we have to work a lot with the community in a way. And to do that at the same time, to understand the memories that they go through, we do need to do a lot of research. And the research that we do generally go about 3 steps. Okay, the first step is what we call as deep hanging out. Spend a lot of time just being there and just hang out. Literally, you don't know what is going to happen. So like, for example, the last 2 years I've been in Ubin, I literally just sit there and then until they recognize that I'm not a tour guide. And then they say, oh, I know you now, you're here doing what? Art? And then slowly they start to get to know you, you start to hear their stories, you build a relation. Then the next thing is to do cultural mapping, where you not just look at, because deep hanging out tell you individual stories. But individual stories, we all have different stories, right? But that may not give you a sense of what, you can't listen to everyone and believe what everyone says. So the cultural mapping allows you to see discrepancy, see contradictions, and understand the community as a whole. And then, lastly, sometimes we will then create data. I'm going to show you some of the kind of research that after our deep hanging out, or after we do research, mapping, or sometimes workshop or focus group. Now, this is one of the projects that we did during COVID and then after COVID, which is a project that we have done for about 10 over years, called Both Sides Now, which look at end-of-life issues. And we were looking at how the Malay-Muslim community respond to this topic on end-of-life, which we know is quite complex. So in order to do that, we actually went through a lot of process. We started from just doing interviews with experts on the field. Then, after that, we did literature reviews. Then after that, we designed focus group workshops with different demographic and communities. And along with us, thank God we had some fundings that came in, and we had sociologists and anthropologists who then worked out and then created very comprehensive kind of reports, on the archetypes and the profiles of the kind of the community, how they respond to this end-of-life issue. And then as artists, we have a lot of all this information that helps us to actually make the work so that the work doesn't get plucked out from somewhere or from story that you just heard from one person or another person. So in a way, when we engage the community, we try as much as we can that we have enough information about the complex, community that we work in. And you can find this on the internet, okay, on the website, yeah. So you can see that this is some of the key points and some of the findings that we have. We came out with a report, and then we had all the different kind of things that we do, it's like, yeah, anyway, now. So the research is so important because it allows us for us to make the work. But we always call this work as the unfinished work. Because if it's an engaged work and if it's finished, you can't engage. You need to be unfinished so that the audience can come and continue the process of finishing the work. So take, for example, a forum theatre. Forum theatre always ends with a tragedy, but it doesn't mean that the character must die, because once die, that means it ends. Okay, so, but it always ends in a situation whereby the protagonist loses all hope and decide not to continue with the struggle. It's unfinished. And then we invite the audience to come up, to finish this process, to try various strategies to solve this problem. So that is what a forum theatre does. So there's this work called The Lesson, which was, which just now Catherine talked about, which was the one on Bukit Brown. This was a piece whereby we gather the public together to work together to vote. Under this scenario, there is a mature estate and 7 sites have been earmarked that one of them has to be removed to build a new MRT station. And the audience has to decide. And there is an iterative process of constantly asking them to vote, rethink, reflect, what is the next step, and they keep generating possibilities and conversations amongst the audience. And that goes on for about 1.5 to 2 hours until they all decide to vote, and then we talk about many things. I think Kirsten was there, and there were things like, why did I even have to agree to that 7 sites? Can we not have the 7 sites? This is not democratic. And within the space, the audience then partake as what I call as a public space, where you start to share knowledge. How come? Where what Rebecca Sonnet would say, when strangers meet strangers, that's when democracy can happen. Right? When strangers are okay to work with strangers. So, yes, that's one of the things that we do. I haven't gone into the part about both sides now, but never mind. We can do it another day. But thank you very much.
I feel like I should apologize. I also wanted to hear more, but then I'm supposed to be the strict timekeeper, but we can come to it during question time. Now we make, the next speaker that we have is Tan Pin Pin. And Charian was saying Kirsten is one of the best journalists working in this time, and Pin Pin is one of my favorite filmmakers from this country. So yes. And I don't think she needs any other introduction, right? I mean, everyone knows. Okay, good, just go.
Can you let me know when I'm 10 minutes up? Then I'll give myself another 5 minutes. That's fine too. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. So thank you for inviting me, and also had several conversations with Joanne, because I too, when I received a message from Charian about this conference, I didn't know what knowledge production meant, because for the longest time I didn't really see myself as a knowledge producer, much less a content producer. So today what I'm going to do, I'm going to talk about maybe how the process that I use to produce emotions, maybe an emotion producer, and how it might be tied to my identity that I've chosen for myself, which is that of a film director and artist, and also the practice of, the daily practice of this role. I will use To Singapore with Love as a case study, but the process that you see articulated here is, as far as I'm concerned, for myself, and I cannot speak for anyone else, you can replicate it for my other works. I'm also glad that I'm in this room amongst all of you, because when I first came in, I walked into the Bosan room and immediately felt that it wasn't my tribe. Because one of the topics was how to win on TikTok in Mandarin, so I was like, oh, okay. Then they pointed, looking at how I was dressing, just pointed me that way. Okay. So many years ago, before the dawn of the internet, I was chatting with a cultural geographer at NUS, and we were talking about something, and then she immediately turned into her other wall, just filled with filing cabinets. And then she would be opening a drawer, flipping through all the tabs, and then pulling out this document of what we were talking about. So I was kind of like quite blown away by how organized she was. It almost felt as if, you know, she had downloaded her whole brain, her geographical brain, into files with nicely written tabs, and just downloaded all her second brain into those folios. And not only that, proceeded to populate these tabs with information. I know this is probably what you all do as academics. No? Google search. Yeah, so I'm like, maybe out of professional necessity in the days before the internet, where you know you had to pull a citation, so you need to be able to retrieve the information. But that image of this lady who is now the president of a local university, with a bank of filing cabinets in her room, has remained with me ever since. Although I have to say that I never replicated it for my own practice, and if I did, I would definitely, you know, not be who I am today. Yeah. My process is slightly much more unruly, I mean, to use Ila's word, extremely organic, and the filing system is like all of it's in my mind mainly. So sometimes the tabs are open and they remain open for years and years and years, and then I forget that it exists. But that kind of unruliness also allows for a certain crazy interdisciplinary thinking, making wild mental leaps that may not otherwise happen if I took a more professional, citation-based approach to what I do. So I'm going to use To Singapore with Love as a case study today, and I wanted to maybe sort of bring you back to maybe how that work came to be. I called it an accidental documentary, and I think by the end of this chit-chat, you will probably totally understand why it was accidental. Because when it first came out, it just seemed it was sort of self-evident, but it never started out that way. And most of my works all have that same serendipitous detours as well. So for me, I made this work in maybe 2003, 2004. It's called 80 kilometers per hour. And it was a video in which I was influenced by Jack Kerouac's Off on the Road, a road movie across the plains of America. And having just come back from America, driving through the flat Midwest, I just thought where miles and miles and miles you would never really see anything because it's so flat apart from cornfields. I was trying to think, wow, wouldn't it be cool if I made a road trip movie in Singapore? And so I proceeded to do that. And because at that time I was also very influenced by structuralist practices in art, by that I mean, like, sometimes, like solo it, they would have like grids, patterns, and stuff like that. I thought, oh, why don't I want to take a structuralist approach to making that as well. And at the same time, I was also interested in editing, in particular films with no editing. And also at the same time, I was also interested in Singapore's built environment. So I mentioned all these little scraps of information because I feel that the holy grail for me as an arts practitioner is to be able to find a formula or a shell in which all these interests can be immediately synthesized into a form. I mean, Heng talked about, using forum theatre to address all his concerns, and you found, in a way, a pattern to be able to articulate that. I mean, for myself, that is what I do as well, except that because I'm masochistic, every film is a new process of trying to find another framework, so the work is really much more painful, or you may also call it adventurous. So you can find 80 kilometers per hour on my website, tanpinpin.com. It starts off at Changi Airport, and I drive right across the PIE at 80 kilometers per hour in one speed. Partly because I was interested to find out how long it takes to drive across Singapore, because I know it takes 6 days to drive across the US. So this is like the opening credits. It's time-stamped, and then the drive starts. And all you see is really a camera pointing out of the window at 80 kilometers per hour. And it ends at Tuas checkpoint. That's the ending point. So I was also thinking about this whole idea of space. And one of the things I wanted to do, because as a teenager, I don't know whether you all did it, I attended Outward Bound School, and we had to canoe around Singapore. 3 days, 2 nights camping on beaches. So in my mind, I always was curious about our shoreline as we canoed around, especially the Jurong part, because it was totally concretized, the whole part of that. And I just thought, oh, wouldn't it be cool if I just made a non-stop video, very similar to 80 kilometers per hour, circumnavigating the country in one long take. Yeah, I could fit Singapore in a 40-minute DV cam tape. In my mind, I'm just wondering, oh, how many DV cam tapes? Because it only took 38 minutes to drive across. How many DV cam tapes do I need to circumnavigate Singapore on a canoe? No, not really. So thinking about our shoreline, I devised another work, and at that time I called it Not to Singapore with Love, but Postcards from the Edge. So this was, I'm just going to show you like a photo slideshow about some photographs that I had taken from that series. Yeah. Actually, can we turn down the lights? Is it possible? Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, so you can actually see Singapore in the horizon. So the series of work was that Singapore had to be in the horizon from wherever we were. So I had gone to basically traveled to Indonesia, Batam, and then traveled around the rim of Singapore from Johor's point of view. So these are the kelongs in the foreground. This is from Pasir Gudang Port. This is from a palm plantation, and I cannot remember exactly where it was, but you can actually maybe see the Senoko chimneys in the horizon as well. This is a duty-free zone at Skudai. near the high school, Skudai High School. And this is, of course, along Jalan Wongafuk, the main drag in Johor City Centre. It'll look right into Singapore from one of the shopping centres, in this straight road right into it. And this is Forest City before it was built. Yeah. I mean, part of the interest in that project was also thinking about Southeast Asia and Singapore's place in it, and how we might be perceived by people who encounter us on a daily basis. Because I was really interested in the idea of Singapore and what did borders actually mean, and do they actually have to mean anything? Because it wasn't that too long ago where you could just take a sampan across, right? And perhaps because I was also interested in the non-mainstream history of Singapore. This is a screenshot from Invisible City where Mr. Han San-yuan, one of the people I interviewed, talked about the May 13th incident where the students were protesting against national service. And the interesting thing, he said, nobody's actually seen these photographs before. So I was really interested in the idea of histories unspoken for, histories that were hidden, even way before, To Singapore with Love was made. This was 2007. And slowly, gingerly, he showed us his photographs in his archive. And apparently, many families have this photograph, but it's all zip-locked and kept, because the mere fact of actually having it would be incendiary. And also in Singapore Gaga, some of you remember Mr. Guo Renhui, where he would be singing the songs that he sang while in the jungles in a communist battalion. I'm only saying all this to show that these open tabs in my mind, they're all just the flotsam and jetsam in one's mind just resurfaces at a certain moment when things come together. And that is the process that I have come to rely upon in producing work. So during the 50th anniversary of Operation Cold Store, Function 8 and an NGO group had organized a huge event at Hong Lim Green in 2012. So because I was already interested in these histories, I attended that rally, which is a very, very important milestone in Singapore's recent past. And, 1 minute. Okay, I stumbled upon this book, Escape from Lion's Paw, which was about first-person accounts of political exiles. Yeah, in the photographs you see Francis, Khoo, Ang Swee Chai, Wap Yao, Juan Tai, and Tang Fong Ha. And I just asked So Lang, the editor, hey, just as part of this, you would call it literature survey, but I would just say, I just want to interview them, possible? Then she gave me the name of Swee Chai. And I just took a camera and then a coach up to KL because she was there for Dr. Lim Hock Siew memorial. And I think by the time, I think we can have the lights on now. Thank you. By the time I interviewed her, my photography project, my coastal project, was immediately flipped. It became, this is a recent photograph with her. It became what we know as To Singapore with Love. Okay, yeah, just 1 more minute. Yeah, let me tie it up. Just a couple of things I would say in the making of this work. First of all, I was I felt that it was important to show all exiles, not just the exiles that I was more comfortable with speaking with, for example, the English-speaking ones, right? So I made an effort that when you watch the film, which you can find somewhere on YouTube, everyone's pretty much given equal time. And I also wanted to make sure that it was accessible. So some of the flourishes that you see in my previous work, I just kept it very, very basic in terms of you just feel that it's an oral history process that was revealed to you. The other thing as well is it was made in secret. I also was very worried in the process that I would have my house raided or my computers taken away. So because it was made in secret, I also felt I had to do everything myself. So I had to learn how to use the camera again, although I learned it in film school. Yeah. So I will just leave you with this last still, the eventual publicity still we use, Juan Thai overlooking Singapore. And just yesterday I was in JB. I saw this amazing banner in which it advertises how near this condo is from Singapore. You can see Singapore in the far end. So I think with that, I will end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pimpin. I still feel like I'm the evil one ending everyone's interesting presentations too soon. But next we have Jason Wee, who is an artist and a writer. And I'm sure many of you as well are familiar with his works. He's written 4 poetry books, and his art can be seen this year at the Angkor Photo Festival and in various places in Berlin and New York. So thank you so much, Jason, for joining us.
Thanks, Joanne, for inviting me. Yes, I'm also known as an artist, but today I would be speaking a bunch of words that really end with the question I sometimes ask myself, which is what can poetry do? I have an other life where I started and I run great projects as well as proud spaces. And if you're interested in those, you can look them up on IG. But today, I'm thinking about poetry. So what I think of as undesirable isn't the same as being abhorrent or evil. Unlike the latter, unlike evil, which is often at the center of our rules of how we conceptualize ethical principles and other apparatuses that altogether encompass our wayfinding through any moral quagmire, the undesirable lives at the borderlines of those rules and principles. Or perhaps the sharper analogy is that the undesirable can sometimes be found at those points where our wayfinding no longer tells us to walk in convergent or even parallel paths. I suspect it is a matter of affect and intensity. Softer in the way that any person feels a tremulous vulnerability in the face of rejection, and with delay rather than instant ferocity. And while it shares with the objectionable the sense of laying outside of permission, and any insistence on permission takes me closer to the question, and takes us closer to the question of power. The undesirable also lies on a topology where the unpopular and the short of ideal imperfections can be mapped. I won't read the quote, it's from a project I did on the fences, but it will have implications later. The first Malayan laws that introduced the undesirable book as a juridical category was passed by the British in 1938. Known as the Undesirable Publication Ordinance, the legislation was substantially revised in 1955 during a time of increasing demands for autonomy by the colonies. In 1967, this was further revised and given expansive powers by post-independent Singapore, and is now renamed and known till today as the Undesirable Publications Act, a law that remains, in the words of Eugene Tan, in symbolic force. So what was undesirable? In 1947, the British military administration denied circulation to 37 publications. By the start of 1959, over 2,000 publications were detained, most of them in the Chinese languages, as reported in the Singapore Free Press, January 1959. The category of publication was numerously revised in the law over the subsequent many decades to cover all kinds of media. In 1970, for example, 5 pop music records were detained. So this, as you can see, is just the start of a record that I pulled from the National Archives. This is the start of that record, beginning with the letters A. You can note from the star that it affects comics. It's one of the, so for those who into the MCU, to MCU and DC, where you have the Suicide Squad dealing with this giant starfish from outer space. It first made an appearance in this comic called The Brave and the Bold, the Justice League of America, and it was considered undesirable. It also affects all language communities. In 1949, Dravida Nahu, an anti-colonial publication, was banned. This ban was only lifted in 2016. In 1957, Malay language fashion magazines Majalah Fashion and Dunia were stopped at the borders. It affects all kinds of materials that you might not expect. Selection of Teochew songs, one where an old fisherman and his daughter sings about happiness in a communist China. Stamps from China was considered undesirable. So was football in the USSR. This is a local band, The Quest. Their 1969 release with EMI Columbia was also irredeemably undesirable. The first single off the record is Proud Mary. It's written by John Fogerty. And Proud Mary was also covered by Tina Turner in the more famous version that you can find. Proud Mary is a lower wage earner who's decided that she has enough of her boss. She's been working for the man who demands long hours and never makes work in the song Nice and Easy, only nice and rough. She, in the words of the song, has never seen the good side of the city until she's rolling, rolling up the river where the people with no money yet are happy to give. So I'm less interested in critiques that restate the state, pardon the bad pun, as the central producer of regulation and how to counter them, as the question of how to be a proud Mary myself. And what interests me is the affect and agency that is possible in the rolling on and rolling up, which is not the same as rolling with it. The question I ask for myself is, what would an undesirable choreography look like? Basically, how would I move through this space? So not a question of how to make necessarily visible knowledge that's been left excluded, or those are important questions, but I think about how can I think about this system of permission and prohibition as an aesthetic possibility. I first began, thanks to Lily's Exactly Foundation, at spaces that contain undesirable activities themselves that remain undesirable even as minorities they ostensibly belong to move towards greater legitimacy. This is a project where I looked at men who are looking out for men in private hours, and sometimes all kinds of hours. When I say private, I don't necessarily mean evening. They can happen in the daytime as well, for intimacy, for sexual encounters. So even as the minorities they ostensibly belong to move towards greater legitimacy and visibility, these remain still unseen activities, sometimes deliberately so. And over time, I had, it led to a project at the Kochi Biennale in India. And you'll notice a couple of things on the wall that I'll just point out. One is a stack, an orange stack, as well as a weaving. They are both actually poems. So that's actually a poem that I had written out in Morse code, so that you do not have to. So what is a poem can remain legible without necessarily being visible. So you can feel the poem, you can still read it if you know the code. And so over time, what constitutes the sculpture on the wall was a publisher's diary. So from an undesirable diary is a publisher's diary, fictional, but drawn from real stories. It's organized into 3 temporalities, beginning in the time just before the implementation of the laws against the undesirable. The central section carries us into the difficulties of making public and connecting with publics in the present. Each diary entry is a record of single painful incidents. And then the final section acknowledges the history of books and bookmaking as a history of foreclosures. So I want to read to you some of the diary entries. Not that my words can't come when summoned, but I want the mutterings of a coven over a single whispering, a tide of lightning shimmering on a dim sky more than an inspired strike. I circle words to avoid enclosure, to open portals to buried passages and entryways. I cross them to invite reply, replacement, the resistance of a rope designed to stumble, touching a knowing foot. A sentence doesn't require completion, only direction. It's pointing to other sentences, the one ahead, and also the old ones it has written over in a fit of a fantasy, of forgetting to appear young again. In the margins, I ask, repeating myself, is this where you're going? What more are you not saying? What does it mean to say a book is taking place? The printers stay cool. I cannot say I have designs on it. The words are being cut, rewritten, added to, and repaginated as I record this. I think of the first time one of those complex interlocking Japanese joinery with 4 differently shaped pieces of wood. How the carpenter shaves and tapers in fitting after fitting before every piece lays on the next as numbers in the balance equation. How does he know? Is it like playing solitaire with a random stack of cards where you only know when you're close to the end if it contains exactly every card in a standard deck? I know because the book has shown some skin, has revealed its silhouette. It's the same with love. Once I run my fingers over their outlines, their curves, something good is taking place. The first ordinance against undesirable books end with the words, from abroad. the shore ahead as a dolly zoom. The closer I come, the wider the mandible. Crumbling in the past, the expanding edge, the clouds on the water, the clouds above, the planets behind them, the sky. Meanwhile, a silver face dipping into vinegar, clarifying at the center my needlessness. What was edge is now ice. I've always seen a face, yet it offers higher definition. What are these wrinkles I now have to understand? I fall into the mall, younger and younger, forgetting more lines I was careful to not cross. There's two more. The custom officer opens my bags, carefully thumbed the spines of the 20 or so books. Who are these for? He opens one cover to read the colophon. Myself. Can anyone read this much? Doubt. What do you do? Wait. Writer. He replaced the book. Any of these yours? Why not? I write. His pen tapped the paper forms in front of him. What does that make me? When I picked up that same book, I put back ash. A fire you can't see that I walked in, will walk through. Call no one a writer until they're dead. A fire for my friends and I. The book decides if we are ash or alive. The final one. An editor knows that order makes the story. Less tidiness or clarity, not resolution, more timing. Whether we're standing by the window before the doorbell rings or after. I cannot accept this as my book. This could be that book. This is in the end your book. This is in the end your book. This could be that book. I cannot accept this as my book.
So I'd like to invite our speakers to join us in front here so we can have a bit of a Q&A. Just thank you so much. It's so fitting for a lit nerd like me for it to end with poetry. So. Did I bring too many chairs? Yeah. Thank you so much. Like I said, I'm the only humanist, right, in AcademiaSG, so I feel like I've taken everybody in a turn off the road, which is great. And I'm just so struck by the plurality and richness of all the work. And when we putting together this panel, we really thought, it had to be accounting for all the genres that are doing the work in Singapore. And I'm so excited about the kind of polyphony of voices that we brought together. I just have one question before I'll open it up to the audience. And I was thinking a lot about what you guys were saying about the bodies. I mean, first when Ela was talking about like sort of hanging out in the body and the naked body, and when we were thinking of the work in with Drama Box about also again hanging out and listening to stories, and then bringing bodies into a space in order to do forum theater and have that kind of tension in the air. And Pinpin, when at first you were like, there were no bodies in the photographs you were taking when you were conceptualizing, well, you didn't know that the accidental documentary that we were going to be making, and then suddenly there were the bodies of the exiles. And of course, Jason thinking about the queering of particular spaces that were prohibited or undesirable, or and that sort of, but not taking those words as sort of anything derogatory, but something instead quite leading us apart. And if we are thinking about knowledge production which is in some ways, like Pinpin was saying, such an alien sort of thought to the kind of practices that you do. I was wondering how all of you saw the body as, kind of your modus operandi, your like methodology in this act of, I don't know, producing a kind of space, or I don't know. So I'll let anyone go first. Yeah, go first.
I think, just a background, I'm known to work with my body, like that's in my bio. So I naturally perform my works. When I do performance, I use my body. But I think in the context of the gathering, right, what is continuously being considered and reconsidered is what are the bodies present and what are the bodies absent and why. This is very conscious in the act of when I gather. What are some of the missing ones? Who is not there? Who is there, and why? Why is there the differences? And how do we allow for a kind of inclusivity without, tokenism, for example, without exploitation? So that informs a lot in my practice. I'm very conscious of that always when I'm working with people who are helping me make work, Yeah, so that's from me.
Thank you. Yeah, go Pinpin.
Joanne. I mean, when I see photographs, it's always the photographs without people inside that create memory for me, or it has far more emotional resonance. But I don't think I'm able to articulate. But when I'm doing video work, documentaries, I find myself gravitating towards storytellers. But rather than just having the storytelling from a voice, from a head, from a body, be the be-all and end-all of that work, I try to find connections with other bodies to see if what everyone is saying can enlarge the picture so that it's more than the sum of parts. Yeah, so I really maybe not quite sure why there's a difference in medium and how I see the body.
I also don't know how to answer that question. But maybe for me, I try to see it in this way. So the bodies has to exist within a space. So for me, curating the space becomes very important. Whether it is open, safe, accountable. Yet at the same time, nowadays I'm more aware of perhaps we put a lot, or I have put a lot to human at the center of the space. And maybe that's why now I become more interested in the environment, and the relationship with the human, and not just the human, but any other kind of sentience that exists in that space. I think it's so easy to see us at the center of everything, that we solve all problems ourselves. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I do think about the body quite a bit. Yeah. Whether it conforms to the normative or it doesn't. But also specifically, I think about how in Kokila's words, like the rhythm of the everyday, I think about what it means for us to move through the everyday. And so I really wanted to take just one person's perspective and see how a person can navigate an archive, a history. And my last slide really was me returning to the spaces that I had went and document for the Exactly project. And to think about the effect of awkwardness, and that perhaps maybe that is the way that we navigate permission and prohibition, that it is not, and I don't see it as a condition of constraint, so I see it as a condition of possibility that I am going to be awkward about it because this system discomforts me, but I'm going to take that as a possibility. I'm going to take that as a beginning. I'm going to take that as an aesthetic. Yeah.
No, thank you. That really makes sense. And I think that in the earlier panels today, we were thinking about struggle, and social change, and how it seems like spaces like the one we're in right now seem rare and hard fought for. And I think that in all the art that you do, all four of you, it is really about producing a certain kind of space for certain bodies, whether human or not. And in honesty, I think it's that experimentation, that speculation, that imagination, that sort of aesthetic pleasure in kind of navigating a new space that really makes the things that you do, because I'm biased, I like art and literature, but it really makes what you're doing kind of pierce our understanding of a kind of more structured space in ways that I think are similar to some of the advocacy that people are doing or some of the research they're doing. But I'd like to open it up to the audience and see whether you guys have questions.
Thank you. Can I say that this is my favorite panel? Because I think you'll touch on something very fundamental in many different ways. There is a visceral response. There is a mind-blowing response, I think. And there is self-exploration. What my question is how do you think all the various disciplines that you all participate in and the processes, how do you think it can help the ecosystem of advocacy? Because I think in my presentation, I said quite clearly that I felt it has an impact on our course in what Heng Leun has done, and in particular, and also writings that come out as a part of the literature inspired by Bukit Brown. How do you bring that ecosystem and your work closer? How do you make that connection stronger?
I was wondering whether if we collected one or two more questions right there.
Sorry, can I? Since
Oh,
I got the. Can
sure.
I, can,
Okay,
can
one
I just,
and then
can
two.
I'm so sorry to hog the mic here. We're all up here. I actually have a question for Heng Leun. Since this is on decentering knowledge production, so I'd like to ask you to talk a little bit about how Both Sides Now has evolved through the years. So I'm one of your very early beneficiaries of Both Sides Now, and it changed my life. I got all my documents sorted out, but it was actually through a partner who actually did the interview with me for me to get my document ready. And I felt that was decentering because you handed over the problem and the conversations. This is about end-of-life decisions, right? And you can't really do end-of-life decisions with an artist. You got to do it internally with your family. So I just had surgery, and I can tell you, it was a big difference because I was prepared that I might not wake up. I mean, it was a simple surgery, but there was a possibility that I could go. But I felt I was so ready, and I felt like that actually goes back to Both Sides Now. How about that? So I want you to talk about how it's changed from when I did it with you guys with the puppets theater and the green bean soup, but now you've done lots of other things. So are you staying true to this kind of decentering and handing over the responsibility and the investment of finding your own knowledge production to the audience?
We're going to take one more question. I saw you had your hand up there.
Hi. This is a question for all, but if we run out of time, I'd like Pin and Jason to reply. So the question is, how has your body been both limiting and also a point of expansiveness, right? That means an opening, right? So yeah, could you say a little bit about that, right? So in what ways does it limit your own body, right? How does it limit the work that you do, right? But what does it also give you that's different at picking up on the idea of being able to expand and move into those other spaces, those imaginative spaces, right? Yeah, thank you.
They're asking all the easy questions today. Good luck. So we have one question about what your work in the various disciplines does to in the ecosystem of advocacy and activism. We have another question specifically for Leun. I'll see, but maybe we can tackle those two questions, the more general ones first. One about the advocacy in the ecosystem, you know, in your art here, and then the other one about the body. Anyone? I feel like I'm testing them. It's very bad.
Because when we do the work, at least in Drama Box, our work usually take across a duration, so sometimes 3 years, 5 years. That requires us to actually engage with various stakeholders along the way. So even like in both sides now, we had to engage MOH, AIC, social works, as the social work, the social, what you call it, the social office, you know, all these people to actually come together. So in a way, then we have to work with the community and with the social workers. We also have to work with volunteers to help us to run the project, because they have to be there every day to listen to any people who come into the space to have conversation on end of life. So in a way, that requires us to constantly engage them, from giving us the space to do it. So I feel that in my case, the kind of advocacy work has a lot to do with mediation, interlocuting, creating that kind of dialogue, and sometimes making them understand what we are doing. I don't think we can ever get them on our side, but we can get them when they realize that they need us more than because we need them.
I think, I mean, coming from, like Heng, you're like on a bigger scale, right? Like for me as an artist, I think, echoing Jason, I work a lot thinking through concealment. So when I make work, I don't necessarily address this is about pollution at the seas. I don't address this is about, you know, bodies being censored. I tell the story. The story is at the heart of it. The emotions, the resonance is at the heart of it. So the actual advocacy is hidden, is concealed. So it gives the agency of the viewer to come to the point themselves. So there are instances where I share my work and people say, oh, you know, I've never thought about it in that manner, or this work moved me, because I think as if I were to think about bigger strategies, I wouldn't be able to carry it out because I'm only one person. So when I make work and when I do finally release work, this is the thing that I keep in consideration. Yeah.
I have another part of what I do is running great projects and proud spaces, and part of why I do that is also I have this other, it could be another thing to talk about, but not necessarily here. But I really think about organizing as an artistic principle. So not organizing just as a way that you think of a unionist organizing, or a programmer or an administrator or a manager managing, but that organizing is part of an artist's life. And when I say that, I also mean a specifically Singaporean context, that that we are no longer seen as citizen. We are no longer seen as a separate category from citizen. That you take us as seriously as artists as we are as citizens, meaning that we can then do both in a way that doesn't press us to be a kind of like social artist, you know, that it must appear in your work, for example. On the other side of that is also why perhaps I'm drawn to poetry, because it's so personal, and I really believe in, even in the midst of organizing, to think about pleasure to think about feeling. And so in Karina's list of going from the individual to something that's much larger, macro, like the state, I think about, of course, work in Proud Spaces and Grey, we think about working in the other levels. But I constantly think about what it means to stay with you, a reader, an individual. You know, what can I do to stay there with you?
So beautifully put. Thank you. Yeah. It's quite interesting because when I'm in a space like this, I feel very, very, I have imposter syndrome because I feel I don't do enough. Like, wow, climate. Oh, what am I doing about climate?
Can you tell her she's wrong, please?
Death penalty. What am I doing about death penalty? So I feel like, oh, am I writing a book on censorship? No. So, and I also feel that sense of insecurity because my explorations are so personal as well. It's always one-to-one. What is my mind telling me? What am I perceiving as a person moving through space, in a space like this especially? But I've come to accept that a lot. I'm okay to tune myself into that register. Yeah, but interestingly enough, if you were a whole bunch of filmmakers, I would feel equally out of space, out of place. Primarily because my work is also considered too social. So I'm fine.
I realize as well, but because of the constraints of time, we might take one or two more questions, and then I'll sort of invite anyone in the audience first, and then if we have a time, perhaps we can answer that question about whether Heng Leung's practice has changed in the period. But does anyone otherwise have questions? Oh, that's true. You're totally right. Okay, come back.
Yeah, I didn't forget it. I feel like the most obvious one now is age. That I move differently from in my 20s. But the other more subtle ones is other changes that are differences. I think of my own gender differently from in my 20s, which also then makes me think about how I present here, and also to others. And it's also a conversation that I had with Joanne prior to this, that I grew up in a way that, unfortunately for me, I wish I didn't have to keep asking myself that question, but I think about how I present when I leave the house in Singapore, as opposed to it just me presenting. Do you know what I mean? So that is a limit that I constantly work through. And it's also why I think about the effect of awkwardness. I think that I can't be the only one to think about how much I've internalized permission and prohibition in all kinds of ways. And then thinking about how, of course, I could approach it, and it's a necessary step sometimes to grieve what's not possible. But I also think about what I can make of it. Yeah, to think of it as
for myself, it is really realizing that there's a certain way of perceiving the world when you're walking. It's so different from any other mode of transportation. Why are you laughing? But you're right. It's also a mode of transportation. But as opposed to taking the car or taking the train, I suddenly realized that when I'm walking, it feels the most suitable for me because I am absorbing information at the pace of thinking. So, and the fact that I'm actually moving through space, there's a certain idea that, oh, this is the perfect pace for experiencing the world.
One of the things I realized that after some time is that sometimes we spend too much time speaking, that we don't listen enough. And one of the things I learned in both sides now was the idea of listening but vulnerable listening. In a way, I think deep hanging out and the vulnerability of people whereby, and I realized that how do I recognize a body that's vulnerable and connect with that vulnerable body as two people, two human beings. So in a way, the work that we do are about relations, right? But not relations as in, we have a kind of transactional one, but a kind of vulnerable relations that, will put us as two souls who we all have gone through different lived experience, hearing each other out. May not be the same, but that would put us in a one level whereby we're listening to each other. I may not have the same experience, but I understand or I know what vulnerability means. And I think that was something that I've been trying to learn over the last 10 years of doing both sides now. And in that way, to respond to a lady, I don't think much has changed. The form may have changed, but that kind of listening space that we've created there so that the person respond to that listening space by telling their own stories. And the idea of narratives and stories ultimately asks 5 very important questions. Who you are, what you're doing, why you're doing this, how you're doing that, and where does this happen?
So I think like echoing that, I think for me, because growing up here, I feel like, and growing old here, the city is very spiky. So to approach someone with any kind of body, there's always a kind of like, what do you want, immediately. So I think I'm privileged in a sense, because I don't know, my energy is just like, tell me more about yourself. Tell me more about what you do. Like, I'm just open to hearing more because I kepo ran with the panel. Sorry, the conference. So I feel like my body can be a privileged body in some parts, but it can also be places where I cannot access because, of the way I am. So there's always these two things. But I think what matters more is the energy that I'm giving out at that particular moment, and how is it reciprocated. And there's always a need for regard of the other body that you're interacting with, be it human or space or whatever. So the interaction and the pollination can take place. Yeah, that's it.
Sorry, we've run out of time. Charian is telling me only got so much time left. I blame him. No, you didn't. He said 5 minutes more. But thank you so much. I want to thank our panelists because this has just been so rich.